Let me ask you something. If you wanted to send Iran a message in a war, where would you strike? Most people would say military bases, missile sites, naval installations. That's conventional thinking. But 3 days ago, the United States dropped precision-guided munitions on a railway bridge in Golestan Province, northeastern Iran. That bridge is 900 miles from the Strait of Hormuz, 900 miles from the actual fighting, 900 miles from any Iranian military asset that poses a direct threat to American forces. So why would you go out of your way, expend expensive munitions, coordinate airstrikes deep inside Iranian territory, just to destroy a railway bridge that has nothing to do with the Gulf, nothing to do with naval blockades, nothing to do with the war as it's being reported on CNN? The answer is this. That strike was not a message to Tehran. That strike was a message to Beijing. And once you understand why, you will understand the real strategic architecture of this entire conflict. We spent months researching what's coming between 2026 and 2030, the economic shifts, the trade corridor wars, the moves being made behind the scenes that will determine the next decade. I put it all into an ebook called The Next Global Shift, How to Stay Ahead of Economic Collapse and War. If you want it, link is in the description and comment section. Let's get into the video. If you're new here, what we do on this channel is we slow down, we look at the map, we look at the numbers, and we find out what is actually happening underneath the headlines. Today we are going to talk about one bridge in one province of Iran. But by the end of this video, you will understand why that bridge connects to China's energy security, to Russia's sanctions escape route, to India's strategic ambitions, and to the long-term survival of the American-dominated global trade system. Let's start with the map. Okay, so this is Iran. You've got the Persian Gulf in the south. You've got the Strait of Hormuz here where all the naval action is happening, where the tankers are, where the American Fifth Fleet operates from Bahrain. Now look north. Look all the way north, past Tehran, past the Alborz Mountains, all the way to the northeastern corner of Iran. Right here, this is Golestan Province. Golestan doesn't look like much on a map. It's not an oil region. It's not a major military hub. It borders Turkmenistan to the north. In peacetime, most people have never even heard of it. But there is one thing that runs through Golestan that makes it extraordinarily important. A railway line. This is not just any railway. This is part of what the world calls the International North-South Transport Corridor. Let's call it the INSDC. And this corridor is one of the most strategically important trade routes being built right now on the planet. Here's what it does. It connects the ports of India in the south, through Iran, up through Azerbaijan or Turkmenistan, and into Russia. And from Russia, you can connect to Eastern Europe or you can connect east into China. And from the other direction, through Iran's eastern border, you can connect directly into Central Asia, Afghanistan, and into Western China through Xinjiang. Iran is the spine of this entire corridor. Without Iran, the route does not work. Remove Iran from this map, and India cannot reach Russia by land. Russia cannot reach the Indian Ocean by land. And China's alternative overland access to the Middle East and the Persian Gulf becomes exponentially harder. So when the U.S. bombed the Golestan Railway Bridge, they didn't just destroy a piece of infrastructure. They cut a nerve in the supply chain that three major powers, China, Russia, and India, are all depending on for their long-term strategic independence from American-controlled maritime choke points. That is why this strike was different. That is why it matters. That is why it's worth talking about for 20 minutes. Now let me explain China's stake in this, because it is absolutely critical. In 2021, China and Iran signed what they called the 25-year Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. A lot of media reported on this, but they mostly reported the dollar amount, which was supposedly $400 billion over 25 years, and then they moved on. That is the wrong way to look at it. What is this deal actually about? Here's how it works. Iran is sitting on the third largest proven oil reserves in the world. It has been locked out of the global oil market for decades because of American sanctions. It cannot sell oil freely to Europe. It cannot sell to Japan. It cannot sell to South Korea. The Americans made sure of that through secondary sanctions. But it can sell oil to China. And China needs oil desperately. China is the largest oil importer in the world. It imports about 11 million barrels per day. Now, the question is, where does that oil come from and how does it get there? Right now, the majority of China's oil comes by sea through the Strait of Malacca. This is a narrow passage between Malaysia and Indonesia. And the problem with the Strait of Malacca is this: the U.S. Navy controls it. In any serious conflict scenario with China, the Americans can theoretically blockade China's oil supply at the Strait of Malacca. China knows this. Chinese strategists literally call it the Malacca Dilemma. It has been discussed in Chinese military journals for 20 years. So what is China's solution? Overland routes. If you can get oil overland through pipelines and through rail from Iran, from Kazakhstan, from Russia into Western China, you bypass the Strait of Malacca entirely. The Americans cannot blockade a railway line. They cannot blockade a pipeline buried under the ground in Central Asia. This is why the INSDC matters to China. This is why the rail corridor through Iran is not just commercial infrastructure. It is strategic infrastructure. And this is why the U.S. bombing of the Golston Bridge is not a random strike. It is a deliberate disruption of China's plan to reduce its dependence on American-controlled sea lanes. Now think about this from the American perspective. If you are the United States and you are watching China build an overland oil supply corridor that you cannot blockade, what do? You go to war in Iran. And while you are fighting Iran, you make sure that the infrastructure China needs gets destroyed in the process. That is what we are watching happen right now. The war in Iran is also a war against China's long-term energy independence. And China knows it. Now let's talk about Russia. Russia's stake in the INSDC is slightly different, but equally important. For Russia, this corridor is about trade survival. Since 2022, when the West imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia after the Ukraine invasion, Russia lost access to European markets. The Baltic Sea trade routes became politically toxic. Western ports refused Russian cargo. Russian banks were cut off from SWIFT. European airspace was closed to Russian planes. So Russia needed to redirect its trade south, through the Caspian Sea, through Iran, to the Indian Ocean. That is the INSDC. That route allows Russian goods to reach India, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and even parts of Africa without going through any Western-controlled choke point. And in the other direction, it allows goods from those regions, consumer electronics, machinery, chemicals, to come back into Russia without touching Europe. Iran is essential to this plan. Iran is not just a partner for Russia. Iran is the only available corridor that makes this alternative trade system work at scale. So when the U.S. destroys Iranian rail infrastructure, it is also tightening the economic pressure on Russia. It is saying, your escape route from Western sanctions runs through Iran, and we are now systematically dismantling that escape route. This is what I mean when I say the Golston Bridge strike was a message to Moscow. Not a bomb. A message. The message is this: we can reach your alternative trade network. We can reach it from 900 miles away from the theater of war. And if we choose to, we can cut you off from it completely. Now, what does Russia do with that message? That is the big question. Because Russia is already in a grinding war in Ukraine. Russia is already under the most comprehensive sanctions regime ever imposed on a major economy. Russia does not have unlimited capacity to open another front. But Russia also cannot afford to let Iran fall. Because if Iran falls and comes under a government friendly to the West, or even just neutral, the INSDC is gone. Russia is fully encircled economically. That is an existential threat to Moscow. So we are watching a situation where the U.S. is using the Iran war to squeeze Russia without directly fighting Russia. That is sophisticated strategy. And so far, it is working. Now I want to talk about what the Americans are actually doing here at a strategic level, because this is where it gets really interesting. In game theory, there's a concept called signaling. A signal is an action that carries a message beyond its immediate physical effect. When a country does something in war that seems disproportionate or strategically odd, it is usually a signal. The physical effect of bombing the Golston Bridge is relatively minor. Iran has other rail connections. The route can be rerouted. The bridge can be repaired over time. The bridge itself is not going to determine the outcome of this war. But the signal is enormous. Here is what the U.S. is signaling by hitting that bridge. Signal number 1. We can reach anywhere in Iran. Not just the Gulf. Not just Tehran. Not just military bases near the coast. We can reach a railway bridge in a province that borders Turkmenistan. We have total reach. There is no safe zone inside Iran. Signal number 2. We understand your overland strategy. This is directed at China and Russia. We know what the INSDC is. We know what it means for your energy security and your trade independence. And we are telling you that we are willing to destroy it. Signal number 3. The cost of protecting Iran is rising. Every week this war continues, the infrastructure that China and Russia were counting on gets damaged further. If you want to save the INSDC, you need to intervene. And intervening means entering a war with the United States. This is a strategy that forces China and Russia to make a decision. Do you intervene in Iran and risk direct conflict with the US? Or do you stay out and watch your long-term strategic investment get destroyed piece by piece? This is a game the Americans are playing, and it is not stupid. It is actually quite calculated. The bet is this: China and Russia will not intervene directly. They will protest. They will send weapons quietly. They will issue statements at the UN. But they will not commit troops or planes, because the cost of direct confrontation with the US is too high. And if that bet is correct, then the Americans can continue destroying Iranian infrastructure, including the overland corridors, without triggering a wider war. And at the end of this, they will have weakened Iran, damaged the INSDC, and set back China's energy diversification plan by years. That is the calculation. It might be wrong, but that is what they are doing. So what can China actually do? Option 1 is direct intervention. Fighter jets, naval assets, openly entering the war on the side of Iran. This is the nuclear option, not literally, but strategically. It means direct military conflict with the US. China is not going to do this. China's economy is too dependent on access to global markets, on exports to the West, on dollar-denominated trade. Right now, a war with the United States would be economically devastating for China. Beijing is not ready for that fight yet. Option 2 is proxy support. China quietly sends Iran weapons, drone components, satellite intelligence, communications technology, radar systems. This is already happening to some degree. The problem is it does not stop the bombing. It helps Iran fight longer, but it does not protect the rail infrastructure. It does not rebuild the Golston Bridge. Option 3 is economic pressure. China starts unwinding some of its U.S. Treasury holdings. It starts reducing dollar transactions and bilateral trade deals. It pushes harder for yuan-denominated oil trade with Saudi Arabia, with Russia, with Iran. This is the slow war. This does not save Iran in the short term, but it accelerates the long-term movement away from the dollar. Most likely, what happens is a combination of Option 2 and Option 3. China supports Iran quietly while accelerating its de-dollarization strategy globally. But here's the thing. None of these options actually saves the Golston Bridge. None of them immediately restores the INSDC corridor to full functionality. The physical damage is done, and every additional strike makes the reconstruction more expensive and more politically complicated. So in the short term, the U.S. strategy is working on China. It is forcing China into a reactive position. China is spending diplomatic energy managing this crisis rather than building the trade corridor it needs. And that is a win for Washington. Not a permanent win, but a win in the current moment. Now pull back. Let's look at this from the highest level. What you are watching right now is not just a war in Iran. You are watching the United States attempting to rewrite the infrastructure of global trade before it loses the ability to do so. Here's what I mean. The American empire runs on two things: the dollar and the ability to control the world's key choke points. The Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, the Bab el-Mandeb. These choke points are where American power is enforced. For the past 15 years, China and Russia have been building overland alternatives to these choke points. The Belt and Road Initiative, the INSDC, cross-border pipelines, digital payment systems that bypass SWIFT. The whole project of this decade for Beijing and Moscow has been to create a world where American choke points do not matter. Iran was a keystone of that project in the Middle East. Without Iran, the overland routes from Russia and Central Asia to the Indian Ocean do not work cleanly. Without Iran, China's western overland access to the Middle East is disrupted. Without Iran, India's connection to Russia and Central Asia becomes far more expensive and politically complicated. By going to war in Iran, the United States is not just trying to remove a regional security threat. It is trying to destroy the keystone before the arch is completed. If this works, the alternative trade architecture that China and Russia have been building gets delayed by a decade. The U.S. retains control of the choke points. The dollar remains the dominant currency of global trade. The American financial system remains the backbone of the international economy. If it does not work, if Iran holds, if China and Russia find ways to keep the corridor alive, if the Islamic world unifies against American intervention, if the global South starts openly rejecting dollar hegemony, then the choke points lose their power. And the architecture of global trade shifts permanently. That is what this war is about at the deepest level. The Golston Bridge is one piece of that story, but it is a revealing piece because it tells you that the Americans understand exactly what they are doing. They are not just fighting Iran. They are fighting the map of the future. So let me bring it back to the question I started with. Why did the U.S. bomb a railway bridge 900 miles from the Gulf? Because the Gulf is not the real target. The real target is the overland trade system that China and Russia have built with Iran at its center. The real message is not to Tehran. The real message is to Beijing and Moscow. And the real stakes of this war are not about nuclear weapons or oil prices or even the survival of the Islamic Republic as a government. The real stakes are about whether the United States can retain control of the systems that make American power work. The dollar, the choke points, and the ability to decide who trades with whom, on what terms, using which currency. That is what we are watching. And we are going to continue watching it very closely. If you want to understand the next move in this game, the one to watch is not Iran. Watch what China does with its dollar reserves in the next 60 days. Watch whether Beijing starts quietly divesting U.S. treasuries. Watch whether yuan-denominated oil contracts start expanding to new buyers. That will tell you more than any military strike. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read everything. This is the video today.